Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm south of Salt Lake City. You're joining us from the Gilbert, Arizona area. And today we're going to be talking about your recent book, The Nine, The Tectonic Forces Reshaping the Workplace. And as we were talking in the pre-interview, I think it's about the 1-year anniversary of the release of the book. So I'm excited to talk with you and unpack those 9 elements and explore like where you feel like things are a year later in terms of some of the predictions and the different forces that you see shaping the workplace. As we get started, I wanted to share Phil's bio with everybody. Phil Simon is a sought-after speaker, recognized authority on technology, collaboration, and the future of work, and he advises companies on how to use technology. His previous books include the award winners Reimagining Collaboration, Message Not Received, and The Age of the Platform. He is also the author of Zoom for Dummies and Slack for Dummies. You've done a lot of cool stuff, Phil. I'm just going to pause there. Anything else you would like to highlight by way of your background, personal context before we dive on in?
That pretty much checks a lot of boxes. I guess that I'm either very curious or, to use a 50-cent word, peripatetic. I, in a way, admire people who could focus on one particular thing their whole career. To me, I'm always curious about how one thing affects something else. So if it seems like I'm a little bit all over the place, it's just because I'm naturally drawn to adjacent areas. But it's not like I write books about French poetry or the Utah Jazz.
Very good. No, I hear you. That resonates with me. I don't know if it's like my squirrel mentality where I'm just like my attention gets drawn in different places, but I see a lot of things that are adjacent, a lot of I like to think of myself as an interdisciplinary kind of guy, which brings a lot of different connections. And sometimes I end up going down a path that's a little bit odd. But most of the time I find them to be quite complementary to each other. And it certainly satisfies my need for learning new things and trying new things and all of that as well. Well, one of the things I like to ask authors when I have them on the podcast is just like, why this book? Why now? Now, when I say why now, it's a year after the initial release of the book, but the topics are all still very timely. What really drove you to write this at this point in time?
I think it was Toni Morrison, John, who famously said, if the book that you want to read doesn't exist, you have to be the one to write it. Go back to, seems like a million years ago, but late November 2022 when ChatGPT dropped. And I immediately, like a lot of people, said, this is a big deal. I think it took 5 days for ChatGPT to reach 1 million users, which completely crushed Facebook, the iPhone, Google going back to 1998. And I thought this is a big deal. And I'd been thinking a little bit about some of the trends that were percolating through the workplace. But my previous 3 books on the future of work, Reimagining Collaboration, Low Code, No Code, and Project Management Hybrid Workplace, really went deep into one area. But I was curious about more of a survey book that couldn't possibly cover everything about any one of these topics, much less all of them. So I decided to put it out there because I did think that we were not at a high level reverting to the pre-COVID workplace. As much as people like Elon Musk wanted to pretend COVID never happened, just too much had changed for too long. Too many of these shifts were taking place, and the interrelationships between and among these forces just fascinated me, and we could talk for hours about those. So I guess I was curious enough to give it a go and see if I could tie together what might seem like a bunch of disparate trends, but I would argue are all very much related.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I think these are all very much related. So let's go ahead and start there. And if you can start by just outlining the 9, and then we can start to kind of one by one go through them briefly and talk about where you feel like things are at today.
Yeah. So the first chapter of the book starts with employee empowerment, and then it goes to dispersion, people working remotely. Again, that hasn't stopped, although maybe it shifted a little bit back towards employers getting people to the office.
Yeah.
Inflation, I saw that the numbers had actually increased a little bit, despite the fact that a lot of people said it's only a matter of time before we're going back to 2%. I disagreed. Looks like I might have gotten that one right. Then we have automation, which we can talk a lot about. Certainly generative AI tools. I mean, ChatGPT is not the only pretty girl at the dance. There's Claude, there's Google Gemini, which used to be Bard, there's Perplexity, there are dozens of other tools. It's impossible to keep track of them. Then you've got blockchain, immersive tech. Certainly, I think it was maybe 7, 8 months ago that Apple released the Vision Pro. We could talk a lot about that if you like. And then you've got unhealthy analytics, and then finally fractions. So those are the 9 in a nutshell, and feel free to take that in any direction you want.
Yeah, thank you. And as I think about, some of these trends, like you say, what was it, a year and a half ago now, with the launch of ChatGPT, that really did cause quite a bit of a shakeup. I'm a professor. That's my full-time gig. And certainly, like, almost immediately, there were all these debates and consternation within higher education, within universities, and certainly in my university space. People were like, the age of the university's dead. What are professors going to do now? Like, this was all the initial conversation, fear mongering, really, around it, because what we've seen over time is that, just like anything else, just like the internet was, just like the personal computer was, just like any other technology, ChatGPT is a great tool that, if learned how to be leveraged ethically, can really support and enhance both what we do in our jobs as professors, but also how we help students learn, and how students can learn to utilize the tool in a ethical way. And so I look a year and a half back and thinking about where the common conversations were around that time versus today. And I think there's still some fear, but I think largely people are recognizing, oh, this is actually something that could really benefit. And of course, is it going to shift the way we do things? Of course. One of the things that I've said to many of the faculty is, if you're teaching a class and you're giving an assignment to a student that can easily be completed by ChatGPT, then it's a crappy assignment and you shouldn't be doing it anyways. And so all it does is force us to up our game a little bit and be more compelling in the types of courses we design, and the experiences and the learning activities that we provide to the students. And overall, like that's a higher ed kind of application. But overall, I see the same thing happening in the corporate space, in the government space, in the nonprofit space, that people are starting to realize we can leverage these technologies. And you listed several of them in the 9 of these various technologies that, yes, are they disruptive? Yes. Are they a little bit scary to some people? Absolutely. But can they be useful in helping us to be more productive or efficient in how we do our jobs, and leveraged as a tool, just like any other technology tool? Absolutely. At least that's my take.
Yeah, we could talk for hours and hours about any one of these things, but as a recovering college professor myself, I agree with you. It's forced professors to up their game. Are you familiar with Ethan Malik out of MIT? His new book is called Co-Intelligence.
Yes.
For listeners who not be familiar with him, he's got a very popular Substack, I think of about 55,000 subscribers, and he not only allows students to use AI in the classroom, but he compels them to do so. And you're right about the assignment. If it's just an essay on Beowulf or writing Python code that figures out all the prime numbers under 1,000, all these tools can do that. Whether they're 100% accurate is a different discussion. But yes, there is a parallel, because a lot of professors, based on my experience, are pretty change averse. I remember in the summer of 2017, when my former employer switched the learning management system, or announced the switch from Blackboard, which I despised, over to Canvas. I said, sign me up. But there were folks who hemmed and hawed because they had set up their Blackboard instance perfectly over the last 20 years. And even if it were the slightest bit different, that would just be a shock to them and they didn't want to sign up. So yes, it is very much a microcosm of the changes taking place in the workplace. And as some smarter people than myself have said, you won't be replaced if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor. The person who will replace you is the person using the AI. So I agree, they are very powerful, but also very dangerous and scary. And we could talk about deepfakes and the need for tools like blockchain to prove provenance, but there's so much to unpack. I just thought that, the individual technologies or directions might change a little bit, but
Yeah.
these trends, these forces are only going to accelerate. And I just didn't see a book out there like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree along the lines of that acceleration. I think that the COVID pandemic really pushed a lot of people, a lot of organizations even further towards that acceleration, even faster, where, we really didn't have a choice. I mean, there were organizations that were entirely remote first organizations pre-pandemic. There were people that had been working remotely for decades pre-pandemic. And there were technologies, a lot of the same technologies that we started to embrace during the pandemic existed pre-pandemic. So it wasn't that all of a sudden, there were all these new things, though new things did develop out of necessity, but we had them. It's just there wasn't mass adoption, but the pandemic kind of forced organizations and people into mass adoption of various technologies that had been in place. And people who were resistant very quickly realized, oh, this is actually a great tool. Like I can use this. It's super helpful, blah, blah, blah. We could go on about that all day. Come back after the pandemic, though, and you feel this pendulum swing of many leaders, especially kind of more traditional, often older leaders who really just kind of want to go back in time. They want to pretend like the pandemic didn't exist. They want, that's why we hear a lot of these kind of edicts of return to office mandates that are coming out in a lot of organizations. And sometimes it makes complete sense. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not against working in the office. I'm in the office right now, but it's the blanket mandate saying everyone universally come back. It's a very odd thing to me that after a period of time where we saw so much volatility, the necessity for rapid pivoting and adjustment, that now there's kind of these universal one size fits all, everyone come back or else you're gone kind of mandates. And it's just in my mind kind of putting the head in the sand, and it's like a way huge overcorrection and pendulum swinging back towards the way it was pre-pandemic. And you highlighted one of the technologies that you talk about in the book, blockchain. So for example, well, maybe I'll ask you to go into that a little bit more, but I like how you just mentioned the role of something like blockchain in really making sure that we have data security and understand what we're looking at in the world of deep fakes, in the world of AI generated content. This is probably more important than it's ever been. You need to be able to verify things, though that seems to be trickier and trickier. Blockchain provides a solution to that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, John. So many people conflate cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, with blockchain. And in fact, if you read Nakamura's white paper from 2008, he talks about a block-based security system, but doesn't actually use the term blockchain. So the way I like to look at it is this. To me, it is insane that I might go to a doctor's office or a dental office, and if I move from Vegas to Arizona, like I did a few years ago, I have to fill out forms. That to me makes zero sense. It's 1940, 1950, things haven't changed. Why isn't there a way, and there is, for me to grant someone the access that they need in a safe and secure fashion? If I'm selling a home, why isn't there a way for me to prove beyond any doubt that in fact I did have the roof replaced or whatever? And blockchain absolutely allows for that type of thing. And it's absolutely essential. I know that it kind of took a little bit of a dip, but again, I do think it's overgeneralizing to conflate it with Bitcoin, but I think it was $64,000 at the time of this recording. It was over at 70. So and Adobe's working on this with Microsoft creative credentials, basically ways to verify that so-and-so said whatever or did whatever, and you are actually buying what you think you're buying. And the implications, forget the future work, just not devolving into anarchy, I think are essential. So I think the goal with that particular chapter, and a couple of people said some very nice things about how I was able to explain it in plain English. Basically, this distributed immutable ledger that you can verify that something actually happened. And go back to remote work for a second. Yeah, I wrote this code. Well, can you prove it? Especially if people aren't working in the office. Go back to what you said before. You're really hitting on trust. There was a SHRM study I quoted in a previous book about how something like 72% of middle managers want everyone back in the office. Why? They don't trust them. They have to prove what they're doing. That's fundamentally what we're talking about here, even though people proved through the pandemic that they were able to work remotely.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that no one ever comes to the office? No, it's really difficult to be a security guard from home, right? It's difficult to prepare food
Right.
if you're a chef, but I do think that there'll be some sort of detente. But to me, the elephant in the room is commercial real estate. So companies, when they say, and there's a great Bloomberg article about a year ago on this, we need people back in the office. Well, is it because we want them to be collaborative and productive, or is it because there are actually in certain cities massive tax breaks to folks when they get a certain percentage of employees in the office every day? Now, to me, the rubber will meet the road when those commercial real estate leases are up. And we've
Yeah.
already seen this, companies like Chase with Jamie Dimon banging the drum for in-person work. Well, when Chase had to renew a decent amount of real estate in New York, I think it was maybe a year ago, a little bit more, it was something like 40% less than what they had now. So it'll be very interesting to see how things play out.
Yeah, for sure. And that trust component that you just highlighted, I think it's part of what's going on both sides of the table. Like trust has eroded, so individuals trust institutions less. Institutions, especially workplaces, seem to be functioning more from a theory X kind of a mindset and trusting employees less. Which always, from the standpoint of a return to work kind of mandate, it has always seemed odd to me, because I get where a leader could be coming from if they feel like if the person's on the office, I can't verify that they're doing the work, etc. I understand the mindset. However, how much do you really know about the work that's getting done when someone's in the office versus when they're working remotely? Unless you're like monitoring everything that they do, unless you're like micromanaging them like crazy, just because they're in a physical office doesn't probably mean you have much better sense of the work that they're doing anyways. Certainly there's no reason why you can't be in tune with and understand like what they're producing and what kind of work quality exists even when someone's remote or in person. It's just baffling to me, like that are we still having this conversation around like butts and seats for someone? It's one thing if you have someone who clocks in and clocks out because they're a waiter at a restaurant or something and you need to be there in person to serve the food. It's something else entirely if you have someone who is a knowledge worker, who's highly skilled, who you're leading, you're leaning on their expertise, and then you want to like track what time their physical butt is in their seat at their desk during the day, and somehow that's going to be your indicator of whether or not they're effective or not. I mean, that's crazy. I've always thought that was crazy for the last, I don't know, 25 years, but it's even crazier now because, like you said, we have like a year and a half of proof, where people were able to demonstrate whether they could do it or not do it in a remote setting.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I understand it. Proximity bias is a real thing. The Future Forum, which was part of Slack, which was then part of Salesforce, which now is no more because they basically shut it down, did some fascinating research. And I mean, it's pretty much definitive at this point that you could be more productive away from the office. You'll have a lower chance of being promoted if you're less productive in the office. And that's just us being humans. Dan Kahneman passed away, I think it was 2 weeks ago. And I'm a big fan of his work, not to name drop, but the only time I ever met a Nobel laureate in my life at a speaking event in Washington, D.C. about 12 years ago, and effectively proved that homo economist, however you pronounce the Latin term, my Latin's a little rusty, doesn't exist, right? This theory of rational thinking. We are fraught with biases, and it's fascinating to read about them. But one of them is, no matter how much intuitive we may agree with you, or intellectually we may agree with you, I don't see Phil. What the hell is he doing? I could be crushing it remotely, but you don't see it. And as you know, we live in an era and have for 10, 12, 15 years now, BYOD. It is not difficult to shirk while you're on the clock. So yes, it's this arbitrary situation that we've convinced ourselves, but we know otherwise. And I think that's why we're seeing great resignation is pretty much over, but no one likes to be micromanaged. And I do think that workers, that's why I led off the book with employee empowerment, have reasserted themselves. We've seen this in the statistics with strikes and unionization rates. We have proven that we can do it remotely for the first time, especially in the United States. I think we inverted things. So pre-COVID, I think that our personal lives pretty much revolved around work. And for 2 years, give or take, depending on all sorts of circumstances, we flipped it, right? Our work lives revolved around our personal lives. And understandably, we don't want to give that back.
I certainly don't want to give that back. I don't think people should want to give that back. I think that's a good priority shift personally. People definitely have a lot of their identities tied up in the work that they do. We have, the majority of our waking hours for many of us are spent doing the work that we do. So it needs to matter. But I've always felt that work is not the most important thing. Like, we have family, we have friends, we have community, we have just our own hobbies.
Yeah,
we have all of these other things that create the holistic life experience, and work's a piece of it, a very important piece of it. And so we want to make sure it's an awesome, worthwhile piece, a purpose-driven, meaningful piece of the overall picture. But yeah, I think it was totally backwards before. And I like that so many people have kind of reclaimed their own life, so to speak, in terms of their priorities and their boundaries and whatnot. And I was just looking at a study probably last Friday, looking at productivity gains over the last however many years. I think it was looking at productivity in 1950 and how on average we've increased productivity by about 2% every year. And so now we can the average worker produces in about a little under 12 hours what used to take that same worker 40 plus hours to do back in 1950. So we have all these tremendous productivity gains. Some researchers had predicted that because of that, we would start to see reduced work weeks, reduced hours, and that we see that in some parts of the world. But we also see in the US, for example, while there's some talk around it, for the most part, I don't see any employers being willing to all of a sudden have their workers work 20% less and still pay them the same salary, even though their productivity is so much higher today than it was 10 years ago, right? And so sharing those productivity gains is not something I see organizations super eager to do, yet employees, workers recognize what's being expected of them today compared to 5-10 years ago, and largely are just saying, no, I'm not putting up with this anymore. Depending on the ebbs and flows of the labor market, sometimes workers have more power than others, and right now it's less than it was a year ago. But we know that we're in a time of labor shortage generally. We know that we're in a time of skills gaps generally across many industries and sectors, and particular types of STEM fields and such, that we're just going to continue to have a shortage. And because of that, I think organizations are going to have to refine and revise their people management approach, so if they want to attract and retain the best people who can help them produce great stuff, great products and services for the market.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but you've touched on two of my forces in the book, one of which is unhealthy analytics. There was a great article, I think from August of 2022 from Vox. And the premise was everyone likes to talk about productivity, but nobody can define it. And in the book, I quote Goodhart's Law, which is one of my faves. It's a little obscure, but in effect, the minute that you decide to measure someone on X ceases to become an effective measure. And there are all sorts of examples, right? If in public schools, it's all about graduation rates. Well, as a former college professor, and we're, let's say, evaluated on student evals, right? It's pretty easy to get a good eval, just make it easy, but they don't really learn anything. The other thing, and I generally agree with you, when it comes to, and then there are a few companies that have said we are going to give you 5 days worth of pay for 4 days worth of work, but you're right, they are the exception rather than the rule. I have seen, and this is just anecdotal, I'm unaware if they exist, I'd love to see them, of any kind of studies or surveys or research around the rise in fractional leadership. A friend of mine actually just took a job for 3 days a week as a fractional chief product officer. Now, yes, part-time work, going back, moonlighting many years, decades. but we typically haven't seen that at a senior level. Now, no one's saying that Alphabet or Microsoft says, you know what, we only need a CFO 2 days a week. That's nonsense. Those are extremely valuable companies. But, especially when you throw in AI, could you get 90% of the juice of a full-time person for only 3 days a week? And if you're a 300-person company that can't really afford to pay someone $400,000 a year for a chief marketing officer role, maybe this is kind of a bridge for now. And especially if you toss in remote work with dispersion, people can call in if they have to on a day they weren't supposed to work. They don't have to get on the plane. They don't have to drive to the office because inflation's still an issue. Yeah, they're just it's really fascinating to me talking to folks about these forces and how they collide.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. Well said. This has just been a great conversation. We've only scratched the surface of what you unpack in your book, but I know at the time I need to let you go. Before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your book, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, philsimon.com. You can find me also on LinkedIn. But yeah, I'd love to hear from readers. I've tried to cover a lot of ground. I think it's by far my most ambitious book. And I'm every time I see a study on LinkedIn or Wall Street Journal or New York Times, I'm just my mind's always thinking about how does this, it's basically like, what do they say, a balloon? You squeeze one part and another part of it is there. So I hope people will check it out. I do think it's, my best work to date.
Wonderful. Phil, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Phil can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.